All right, I just finished reading the book Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson. And what I'm going to do is I'll read that through a second time in more detail, chapter by chapter. But I just wanted to get an overview what is in there, and I just was too curious to get through it. So what I did is just listen to it in an audiobook format as quickly as possible. And in this video, I'm going to share some initial impressions of the book. And also, I will share my thoughts already about this very first page, basically, of the book, where Walter Isaacson starts with two quotes, one from Elon Musk and one from Steve Jobs. And I think those are amazingly well chosen. But let me get into this after sharing some initial thoughts about the book. So Elon Musk is a person that I followed quite a lot, basically reading his tweets and news about him every day or every second day, and especially his products, his announcement. I'm a big fan of him. So I was really looking forward. And especially I was curious if there are new information that aren't really like public before. And just on a spontaneous reflection, there are a few things that come to my mind. The first thing that strikes me is that Elon Musk is extremely mission driven. And I knew that, of course. Tesla has the mission of accelerating sustainable transport, and SpaceX has the mission of making life multiplanetary, basically making humanity multiplanetary. But there is much more detail than I knew before from Walter Isaacson. For example, in the case of SpaceX, he really mentions how in many small meetings with teams, with employees in SpaceX, he again and again brings up that basic motivation and uses that to encourage them to work harder, work more, because it's an urgent topic that he really cares about. So it's not something that just stands at the beginning of his company when he founds it, but something that motivates him throughout. And sort of connected with that is the idea that money is really not at the core and not the fundamental reason why he cares about his business. And that's also why he gets into a disagreement with Bill Gates once, because Bill Gates famously shortened Tesla stock. I think it's $1.5 billion of short sales that he did. And Bill Gates just thought that Tesla is overvalued, so it would be all right to make money by short selling that company. It was nothing more to him. But to Elon Musk, that was hypocrisy, or is still in his mind. He still assesses that as hypocrisy, because he thinks if he does that, then his whole philanthropy about climate change is kind of a joke. If he sabotages the company that does the most to reduce CO2 emissions and build a sustainable future. So at that point, you can really see that he doesn't care about money. And there are also interesting similarities to Steve Jobs and other historical figures that are driven by kind of principle or by certain ideas rather than by wealth. But I'll talk about Steve Jobs a bit more when we get to the quotes. Then the second point that I wasn't really aware of is how much Elon Musk is shaped by his father. Basically, he had an extremely rough childhood where he got, for example, in one case, beaten up by some of his classmates at school. He was in hospital for, I believe, several weeks. And after he came home, his father basically for an hour or even several hours just told him how stupid he was to get in that situation, basically defending the bullies that sent Elon Musk to the hospital. So that's probably quite a traumatizing experience. But on the other hand, it's also then interesting to learn that Elon Musk has a similar type of behavior, kind of emotional, lack of emotion when he thinks that some of his employees at Tesla or SpaceX are at fault. So in these situations, it's him then who is kind of harsh to them, although I wouldn't really put it at the same degree as we see in this example from his father. And what's also interesting in these moments, that's also similar to his father. Apparently, his father doesn't remember this situation in that way. And Elon Musk also tends to not remember after being mean to certain employees that he berated them. So some employee might be shocked and might think that Elon Musk really has a personal issue with him. But Elon Musk basically a few days later already doesn't remember that anymore because it's not something he cares about. He cares about his mission. So that's also really an interesting kind of insight that I gained there. And then the third thing that was kind of new to me, in some way it was, in some way not, is kind of his addiction to risk and drama, and something that Walter Isaacson calls demon mode. And the thing that I learned here is that he just has different modes at different times. Most of the time he's in something called engineering mode, where he solves detailed problems like technical issues about the number of screws at a certain part in a car, for example. But then at some points he might just be super harsh. And at other times, again, he might play computer games late at night. So there are just these kind of different modes to him that you don't necessarily see when you just know his public persona that he shares on Twitter, but also in his announcements. It's also talking about his personality. It's of course also the case that this is reflected in his companies in some way. And the biggest clash you see once he buys Twitter, because Twitter is basically kind of a well-feeling culture. I think psychological safety is a big thing there. Even every employee gets to take off 1 day per month as a wellness day or mental well-being day or something. And that's, of course, not Elon Musk's view at all. He is into hardcore work and basically just getting things done. And people might get burnout, but that's kind of just still his view that this way more gets done, and that's what our companies are about. So that's also how he, of course, selected then those employees that didn't get fired. And also that's connected to the reason why he renamed the company X. I think it would also have happened otherwise, but still, I think Twitter was to him connected to this well-feeling culture in the end, and that was an additional reason to go back to X, which is, of course, a letter and a name that he's very attached with, that we know from his child, from a company called SpaceX, and just in many other situations, like the new AI company is called X.AI, so he really likes the letter X. Yeah, and so these are just some spontaneous things that I remember. As I mentioned, I just listened through the book without really taking much notes, and there are other things that I thought are impressive, but that don't spontaneously stick into my mind. So I'll think about reflecting on those as I read through the book again, and potentially I'll also continuously make videos about my reflections. I'm not sure about that yet, but I might. And what I already want to share is some reflections on this first page here, where Walter Isaacson just starts the book with 2 quotes. And the first one is from Elon Musk in Saturday Night Live in 2021, where he says, "To anyone I've offended, I just want to say I reinvented electric cars and I'm sending people to Mars in a rocket ship. Did you think I was also going to be a chill, normal dude?" And then the second quote he puts there is from Steve Jobs, and that is, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And it's really interesting that Walter Isaacson puts these two quotes there. Of course, Walter Isaacson also wrote the biography of Steve Jobs. So in some sense, that absolutely makes sense. But still, it's kind of interesting to me because these are the two people that during my life I admired the most. And I also was always wondering what are the similarities between those two and what are the differences. And I think the quote from Steve Jobs that he puts there is exactly one aspect that makes them very similar, that both of them have a very strong self-confidence and clear goals, what they want to do. And they're basically alpha personalities. And both of them totally control what the company says towards the outside world. No one in Apple basically is allowed to speak to the press except Steve Jobs. And even Steve Jobs barely does that. And Elon Musk, of course, he is more erratic. He posts random stuff on Twitter every day. But he basically also doesn't tolerate anyone else in the company making important decisions or communicating with the outside world. It's all in his hands. And that's kind of a very interesting similarity. And I just for myself wrote down some other quotes that I also think are sort of fitting for both of them. The first one is also from Steve Jobs. It goes like this. "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." And this is from 1977 from an Apple II brochure. And actually, the source doesn't say it's from Steve Jobs, but yeah, we know that Steve Jobs controlled everything that was going on at Apple, as I just mentioned. So definitely this quote is from him, or at least approved by him. And why I think this applies so well for them is because also Elon Musk is very much about simplicity and reducing stuff that isn't necessary. And you see that, for example, in the interior car of the Tesla Model 3 or Model X. The whole interior is extremely simple and the interface is just a touchscreen in the middle, sort of like an iPad. And if he could have his way, he would already today take off the steering wheel and everything that gets in the way of the user or the driver. But that has to remain there. So this quote is sometimes attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, but I think it's not really by him. That's kind of a misattribution. So let's leave it with Steve Jobs. Then another quote is actually one from Goethe. And that I just put in more for myself. This is true for any entrepreneur, but also for those two. And that goes like this. "Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do." And when I'm reflecting about other people that I feel I align with a lot in my thinking in the internet or in the real world, I feel a lot of these people that I know are stuck in the knowing and being willing, basically, but not applying and doing. And I would say that is even true for myself, but that is something that Elon Musk and Steve Jobs never got stuck. I think there is a Steve Jobs quote like, real people deliver, or real successful companies deliver. And then even though he likes to be perfectionist, he also wants to deliver. And even more so with Elon Musk setting impossible deadlines. So in some way, I feel this quote also fits for both of them, even though it's less at the core compared to the previous one. And then the last one, that goes like this, by Napoleon Hill from Think and Grow Rich from 1937. It goes like this. whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. And that is sort of so true for both of them. They both have such a strong idea and a will, and they in some way are enabled by that to really shape reality. In the case of Steve Jobs, there is also something that's called reality distortion field, where he believes something himself and also makes others believe that, even though it's total nonsense. In the case of Elon Musk, it's more backed by reality. It's less detached from that, but still it's his own conviction that drives people to do things. And in that sense, I feel the will of power is also called the law of attraction, is something that we can observe super well with both of those people. And because Steve Jobs, of course, passed away, the person to look at right now is Elon Musk, and we can still see it in action as he goes through running his 6 or 7 businesses. He's still running all at the same time. Yeah, so these are some of my initial thoughts as I read through the book and thoughts about these initial quotes. And I will take a lot of time to read through that book. Maybe I'll do like 1 chapter a day, and there are 95 chapters, so that might take me several months. But this book is, first of all, super interesting and also super inspirational to me. So I'm going to spend a lot of time with this. And if you haven't picked it up, I, of course, can just highly recommend this book and also other books by Walter Isaacson, like Steve Jobs or the Benjamin Franklin biography. Yeah, so that's a spontaneous reflection, and maybe I'll see you in the next one. Bye.